Alright, I need to stop this downward trend in the amount of books I'm reading. The trend of this graph is concerning. And I didn't even play that much Mass Effect this month. I played some Mass Effect. I guess I played quite a bit of Mass Effect. Anyways, wrap up for the month of August. Going to be kind of a short one because I didn't get a lot of reading done. I have been working more and I've just been a little tired. So I am working less in September and actually have not a super heavy class load. So I'm hoping to be able to read quite a bit more in September. I have had a good start of that because I read like 330 pages on the 1st of September yesterday. So, hopefully I can get more reading than September. I only read 3.5 books this month. And I say 4.5. And the first is, I'm going to mention The Shadow Throne, which I read about a third of. And I kind of ended up putting down just because I saw Christopher Rocchio's top 10 sci-fi videos and randomly started reading Book of the New Sun and then forgot about this. And this is one where I normally don't distinguish between shelving and DNFing, but I feel the need to distinguish here because this was good. I don't think it was fantastic, but it was looking at like around the 6 to 7 range. It was pretty solid in most aspects, had some really interesting stuff going on. I just kind of didn't feel like reading it, and I wanted to read. There's so many things I really wanted to read, and I think the read along and like the live shows kind of fizzled out anyways, so I just kind of lost motivation to read this, despite the fact that it was good. So I kind of shelved that, but I will get back to it later because it's a good series, and apparently it's supposed to be one of the weaker books, so yeah. Anyways, the first book I finished was the book I did for my university book club, which was The Parable of the Sower, and this was actually for the July read. And The Parable of the Sower is a high-quality book that's made me wonder if I just don't really, like, if post-apocalyptic books set in the continental United States are not really my jam, because I've now read 2 of them, The Stand and Parable of the Sower, and everyone else seems to love them, and I'm like, both of them were like, this is pretty good. So, yeah, I read this, and this is, honestly, I think I was more annoyed just by everyone saying this predicted the future, which I just think is completely overblown. But that's not a flaw of the book itself, like, you don't expect a book to predict the future. But it was written in the 90s, it just took every single issue in the 90s, and just made all of them worse. Like, it didn't actually predict any of the issues that are unique to the 2020s compared to the 90s, and also some of the issues of the 90s have gotten better, some have gotten worse, so I kind of feel like you could do that for like any time period, just take all the issues and just have all of them get worse, and some of them in reality will get worse, so it'll make you look prophetic. That being said, the actual strength of this novel is making the world feel believable, whether it actually, like, and believable that this would happen, whether it actually did predict the future or not, and it was very good at that. And I do think as a dystopian novel, a very strong element of this book is that made it feel more believable, is that it didn't have like one big event, it just kind of was like a slow degradation. And basically this isn't like an end of the world, this is just like what if the United States became a third world country, basically, and just kind of slowly collapsed. Had a really interesting protagonist, also had a religious element that was really interesting. One thing that did slightly hold it back for me was for the first half of the book, I didn't feel like the side cast was that interesting. And then there was an event in the book, and kind of we had introduced some new characters, and I thought all of them were a lot more fleshed out than the side cast for like the first half. One thing I will say is, like, for a classic wise, it's very readable. Like, the writing style is good in a very straightforward fashion. It definitely, like, it's one of the books that's, despite not having, like, super high, like, content level, it does have stuff that's just scary because of, like, the societal things. So it did do some stuff well, but I did sometimes struggle with the first half. I wonder, and I just don't think it's an aesthetic I really find interesting, because this is now 2 books I've read in this aesthetic, this and The Stand, where I just wasn't enjoying myself as I feel like I would based on the quality of the book. I did give this a higher score than The Stand, so sorry, The Stand fans, even though I think The Stand is much better from a characterization perspective. This was just a lot shorter and tighter, which I feel like if you're enjoying a book like a middle amount, it being indulgent is going to make you like it less, and if you're really enjoying a book, it being indulgent will make you like it more. So I gave this like 6.6 out of 10. It was really close between 3 and 4 stars for me. It was like a really high. It would be like a 3.5. Still, I think like a very good book, and making me just wonder if this kind of isn't the subgenre for me. I think the ultimate test for this is going to be Swan Song, which is also, as far as I know, a like post-apocalyptic dystopian book set in the continental United States, and so we're going to see what happens there. And I can say the other 3 books I read in the month I loved. One was a reread though, which I'll talk about next, which was Assassin's Quest by Robin Hobb. This is obviously, Robin Hobb's my favorite author. This is probably the most divisive Robin Hobb book. I think if you look at my original Goodreads review, every single criticism I had was completely fair. I do not think this is a perfect book. I think the pacing is a mess. And I think at times Robin Hobb doesn't play to her strengths. That being said, I have discovered on reread that I simply do not care about these issues, and that I loved it anyways for the strengths it had, and for the fact that it's following fits, and just that. I mean, Robin Hobb is my favorite character writer, and one of my favorite and one of my favorite prose writers, and my favorite authors. So she can still have a bunch of things that I find to be legitimate criticisms, and I can still enjoy the ever-loving crap out of this book. I enjoyed it cover to cover, and it kept me compelled basically the entire time, and it really, pulled on the heartstrings. So Assassin's Quest, 9.2 out of 10, which, maybe my original review is like more unbiased, and this might be biased because this has legitimate criticism. Like, there's the scene in Whiplash where the guy's like, "Are you rushing or are you dragging?"
Were you rushing or were you dragging?
And Robin Hobb, well, if she was writing this book and he was yelling at her, could be like, "I'm doing both, but I don't care, because I loved it anyways." Okay, next up, with a slightly lower rating, but not a reread, we have the one that I ditched the Shadow Throne for because of an enthusiastic Christopher Ruocchio, which is The Shadow of the Torturer by Gene Wolfe. This was a wild book. So this is obviously, it's a very dense book. I've seen some people call it the Malazan of sci-fi, which it's amazing how not at all similar this is to Malazan. Like, it's completely different. It basically only bears 2 similarities to Malazan. One is that it has stuff that's screwed up. 2 is that it's high in quality. And 3 is that it's challenging. But the things that make it challenging are completely and utterly different. When I was reading this, I felt the impression like I was only getting about 5% of what was going on, but not for the reason you think. It's not because I would read a chapter and be like, I didn't get anything from that. I actually got a completely normal amount of story and character and plot, and more than normal world building and themes from that chapter. It just feels like that chapter contained an inexhaustibly huge amount of stuff that I didn't get. So, I don't actually want to give this a score until I've read the entire Book of the New Sun. I did give it 5 stars on Goodreads, purely in terms of enjoyment, not in terms of how impressive I think it is. I'd give it a 9 out of 10. I just really enjoyed reading it because of how bizarre and well written it is, and how interesting the protagonist, and even the small amount of stuff that I did catch was extremely cool. I know there is a bunch of stuff relating to like Christianity in these books, and I didn't get any of it because I don't really know anything about Christianity. And I was commenting things like, people were like, "Did you decipher this?" And I was like, I didn't decipher shit. And I still really enjoyed it. So I think you do not have to study this book and read each page 17 times to just have an enjoyable read with a super bizarre world and a kind of insane and really interesting protagonist and really good writing and a fascinating setting. Okay, and last off, my book of the month had like the same people for all the book of the months, and we have a return for his 3rd book of the month, Christopher Ruocchio with the arc of Ashes of Man. So, Ashes of Man is, in some respects, I think, the best Sun Eater book. I think it is, in terms of his writing of supporting cast, by far his strongest book. I have thought leading up to this that the supporting cast, while good, was a relative weakness of the series, and I'm starting to not think that's the case. I really think it's true now that basically every supporting character has substance and is interesting. Hadrian is still one of the most interesting and fascinating characters in all of fantasy. He's old now in this book. He's very old, and the kind of way Christopher Rocchio, I think, honestly approaches what would happen if you had like a multi-century-year-old person who basically was in constant conflict, because he's the protagonist of a book, for a large portion of those multiple centuries, where he's just getting burnt out. And so despite that, and I thought it was paced really well in terms of like what type of conflict it was much more like political thriller. It reminded me the most of Demon in White, while also having some crazy lore and world building stuff. The only thing that holds it back from being my favorite Sun Eater book is just the rule of cool, in that I think Demon in White and Kingdoms of Death just had slightly cooler things going on. So it is my third favorite Sun Eater book, and it's almost tied with Kingdoms of Death. I think it's going to be less divisive than Kingdoms of Death is my prediction. I think less people will have Ashes of Man as their favorite Sun Eater book, but I also think it would be weird if this was like your least favorite Sun Eater book. Like, I don't know what would cause that. And yeah, it was really excellent. And Rocchio's prose obviously continues to be fantastic. Okay, that's it. That's the month of August. Not that many books. But almost all of them were good. And even the one I didn't like as much, I think quality-wise was very excellent. And it's just, I think, a setting and aesthetic that, for whatever reason, I just don't find as engaging. So let me know what you read in the month of August and whether you've read any of these and what you thought. Have a nice day, everyone.